a one-part series, but I was going over all the information I want to share with you guys. And there's so many things to talk about, from blood sugar imbalance, circadian rhythm, having neurotransmitter, GI issues, just stress and HPA axis dysfunction, genetic susceptibilities, and EMFs. It's no wonder that we have a problem with sleep. And a really amazing book, actually, that I'd love to share with you guys is called Lights Out. It's called Lights Out, and it's written by T.S. Wiley. If any of you have read that, let me know. I'll put a yes in the chat box. But it's Sleep, Sugar, and Survival. Get 9+ hours of sleep a night and lose weight, curb your cravings for carbohydrates, eradicate depression, lower your blood pressure and stress levels, reverse type 2 diabetes, minimize the risk of heart disease, help prevent cancer. So it's a really fascinating book, and it talks about how we really changed the evolution of our human body when we invented the light bulb. Because what happened was we ended up creating longer days, and that mimicked the summers and the time of the season when we would be plentiful and we would have lots of foods. But what would come after the summer was the fall, and so our body would get into prep mode because of the light and the long days. So we would become more insulin resistant, our hormones would become more elevated, and then the winter never came, and as a result we had major metabolic issues and problems with sleep. So I'm not going to be getting too much into that on today's presentation, but I do want to explain the relationship between fatigue, HPA axis dysfunction, a chaotic world that we live in, and sleep. And especially I want to make sure that we give you some walk-away tools for you to be able to implement tonight, so that you'll have some major wins, because that's really what it's about. Is my goal is to give you some ahas and to give you some major outside the box paradigm shifts that you could implement, that you might already be doing a lot of things right, but you're not moving the needle as far or as much as you want to. And I'm hoping that these little 1 to 5 degrees of distinctions will give you that 95 to 100% results that you're looking for. So as always, this is for men and women that are stuck in overwhelm and burnout, and they're still looking for answers, meaning they've been searching and searching and they know something's missing, and they're looking for that missing puzzle piece, or the connecting dots that weaves everything together and allows you to tap into your hidden energy reserves, whether you've been struggling for years or just feeling stuck. And I truly believe that there are hidden energy reserves. Your body is not metabolically healthy when you're under stress and overwhelm and all the things that we have to contend with on a daily basis, from family to job to income to world to pandemics to nutritional, all of the above. We're just overstressed, overstimulated, and our body is not producing energy at the level that we need to. And in order to solve the problem, we want to work on the demand side and reduce the amount of energy that we need to produce, and then increase the amount of energy that we're able to produce. So we want to decrease the demand and increase the supply. And that's what this is about tonight. So in the next 45 minutes, what I want to do is I want to reveal how our current healthcare model is really broken. And it focuses on symptom management, and it focuses on the pharmaceutical approach, and it focuses on the insurance-based model, all of which are meant to make millions and billions of dollars and ultimately not get to the root cause of the problem. No medication treats the cause. It's treating the symptom. And another really great book I would suggest that you look at is called Metabolical by Dr. Robert Lustig. And he really pulls the curtains down about how insurance companies and medical schools and research and big pharma and the food bill and everything else in between is really causing our epidemic of health challenges for the almighty dollar. And unfortunately, it's not set up to get you healthy. And that's one of my major missions going forward, is to democratize healthcare and empower you to be able to understand what it truly means to be healthy. I think in that book, Robert Lustig talks about 98% of the healthcare dollars goes to pharmaceuticals and treating symptoms, and 2% goes into preventative measures. That's ridiculous. And preventative measures don't sell dollars to big companies, but it's those things that are going to make the biggest differences. So it really is set up to keep us sick, unfortunately. And what I want to do is teach you, learn what not being able to sleep has to do with your adrenals and the relationship between stress and insomnia. And there's a couple of just basic things that you would think, like if I'm under stress, when I get stressed, that releases my stress hormones, of which you have cortisol and glucocorticoids, and your stress neurotransmitters, which are excitatory and keeps you in that sympathetic fight or flight. And that's no place to be when you're wanting to sleep. So that's very common sense stuff. But then there's some underlying stuff where we get cortisol release, which causes insulin release, which causes insulin resistance, which causes fatty liver. And our liver works in the third shift, so we're not able to sleep effectively because of that. Lots of things that I want to get into tonight on that. I want to talk about circadian rhythm entrainment. And again, the light bulb, as great as it was to allow us to be more productive, our body has been evolutionarily, or just over the ancestral years of being on the planet, has been entrained. For when we say entrained, it's been, I guess, neuroplasticized, or been just synchronized to work with the way that the cycles of the earth work, and in terms of day and night. And I always say that one of the best ways that you can really help getting healthy is to go camping. And I don't mean glamping. Go camping for 3 days or 5 days, where you don't bring your phone, or it's not being charged by your head. The light isn't creeping in through the bathroom, or your clock radio, or your power cords that are in your room, or your Wi-Fi, or your TV, or Grand Central Station. And you don't have a refrigerator, and you don't have a television, and you start to get tired, maybe when it starts to get dark, and you have a little bit of a campfire, maybe you sing songs or have a drink or two. But then when you wake up in the morning, the sun comes up and you're up. And after 1 or 2 or 3 days, your body has been entrained to start getting tired when it's nighttime, and start being energized, or at least waking up when it's morning time. And we've lost the connection with the earth and the circadian rhythm. And our cells are really programmed. Every single cell, every single tissue, every single organ, and all the systems work on a circadian rhythm. And if you don't have an approach from your doctor, your functional doctor, your integrative doctor, your specialist, and they're prescribing you medications to sleep, and you're not considering 1 second circadian rhythm entrainment, you're being mishandled, in my opinion. And I do feel that that is a breach of the Hippocratic Oath, because doctors are supposed to teach you how to be healthy, whether it's with prescriptive drugs or not. The role of blood sugar levels and what they play with your sleep, because obviously if we're waking up in the middle of the night because our cortisol levels are too low, and you have a drop in your blood glucose levels, that's going to cause a sympathetic release to wake you up. And a lot of people understand and feel that. Or if your cortisol's half-life is very, very short, and you're deactivating cortisol, that can cause you to wake up several times in the night. Or if your cortisol is very, very high before you go to bed because you have massive amounts of stress, you're not going to be able to fall asleep. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then excitatory neurotransmitters are amazing. Tonight I'm going to be talking about glutamate. And glutamate is a neurotransmitter you need to understand and modulate, because even if you don't have a genetic susceptibility with neurotransmission, you definitely have a glutamate issue that you need to be aware of. And then if you do have a genetic susceptibility, which most people do, then you will that much be more doubly impacted by the fact that your glutamate is not clearing out effectively. And then we will talk about the role of genes and genetic susceptibilities that play in your insomnia. We won't be talking about that tonight. We'll be talking about that next week. And I will, if you guys want, just let me know in the chat box. If you guys want this PowerPoint presentation, I have no problems with sharing it with you. And so just let me know that. But, and as well, I'll be sending you the replay so you can watch this again. Just remember, there's going to be a test. It's not going to be multiple choice. You're going to have to study very hard. And if you don't pass, you're going to be in big trouble. So just make sure that that's the case. And all right. So as far as, yes, I will make sure I do that. Now, I've also now, sorry about this, I have to share my screen, exit out of this for a second, because now I can't. When I bring up my chat window, which is not letting me to actually exit now. I'm sorry about this. I have a little bit of a computer glitch. My computer is frozen. 1 second here. It's not letting me exit out. Sorry about that. So I have to exit out of that, because when that chat box comes up, I can't see my slides any longer. Someone's need to talk to Zoom and tell them that you got to allow the cursor to be seen. So, all right. So next, oh, now it's not playing. So many things to remember. All right. So we talked about the circadian rhythm and genetic susceptibility. So my goal or my promise to you is to give you a new way of thinking about your insomnia and adrenal health, so that you don't necessarily have to take the Ambien, or you don't have to continue to take the GABA or the melatonin. A lot of the things that happen with the clients that we work with, I use this analogy. If you haven't heard this already, I think it's a good analogy, where it's hard enough to teach you how to get healthy, or how to get to the point where you're addressing all the things that are going on in your body that aren't being addressed, or how to be able to increase your supply and decrease your demand that aren't being addressed. But it's even harder when you, with the good intentions of what you read online, or the things you do, or the things you try, or the doctors you see, and they give you tools or medication or different types of protocols, and it makes you worse. Now we have a double work to do. And the example is I used is, if I'm the golf pro and you're coming to see me, it's hard enough to teach you how to swing a golf club correctly, let alone now I have to teach you how to swing in how to unlearn the incorrect way of swinging and teach you how to swing the right way now, because you were taught the wrong way and you were never taught the right way. And that happens a lot with chronic health problems, is people were given the wrong thing in the first place. And maybe you should never have been put on thyroid hormone, or maybe you should never have been put on prednisone, or maybe you should never have been put on bioidentical hormones, or maybe you should never have tried the Xanax, because the reason that you were taking it was not because you had a Xanax or hypothyroid, like synthroid or prednisone deficit. It's a sad problem, because now your body has built up a tolerance, a chemical addiction in a lot of ways, and it's very hard to undo those things. So my goal is to give you a new paradigm and to give you hope. So let's talk about circadian rhythm. So we know that our organs, our cells in our body, they run on an internal clock, which is programmed to turn on and off thousands of genes at different times of the day and night. So we know that when we get up in the morning, our cortisol levels should be nice and high. We have that cortisol awakening response. As the dawn starts to become light, that's when our cortisol starts to climb. And that's when, within about 45 minutes to an hour, give or take, you should have a doubling of your cortisol. And then slowly throughout the day, your cortisol should be falling, so that ideally, textbook-like fashion, you should be hitting your pillow like a sleeping baby, and then your cortisol is at its lowest, and then it continues the next day. When the dawn comes up, the sun rises, your cortisol levels go. So you should be on a circadian rhythm. And in contrast, when it starts to get dark out, you should start to rise or raise your melatonin, and it's really high at night. And then as the sun comes up, your melatonin is low. And we are so disconnected with the earth that those circadian rhythms are so off. And not just that, just our liver, our gallbladder, our different organs and systems work on a circadian clock. And the light exposure that we get during the day helps us to know, like a compass, which is up and down, what's north and south. And when we have these artificial lights that we get for so long during the day, and at nighttime we have our phones and we don't have blue blocking glasses on, and we're getting blue light exposure, it's hitting the part in your eye, the optic chiasmic centers in your eye that basically tell your brain it's light time and hold off on the melatonin production. And so we really want to make sure we're aware of that, because all our cells run on a circadian rhythm, and that's not going to be found in the end of a supplement bottle or prescription medication. And virtually all life forms have developed or programmed within their DNA an internal dineural, which means just a day, almost a 24-hour day clock, that are connected to the day and night cycles. I think there was an amazing study where they had people in a really, really dark cave, and they were supposed to call the testers to find out what time it was or what time they thought it was. And they were so connected with the earth over a certain amount of time, because of our clocks are programmed to run that way. And as we get inundated with technology and exposures to light and EMFs and all the things that we're getting exposed to on a daily basis, it disconnects us, and that creates major challenges in our body. So I'm trying to forward our slide here. Okay. So these internal clocks prepare us from everything from waking up as your cortisol levels are programmed to start to rise in the morning, hit a peak in the mid-morning, and steadily fall throughout the day, which we talked about anyways. When they are in sync, they do their jobs they are supposed to do, and our bodies run smoothly. And when they're not in sync, it's like an orchestra that doesn't have a conductor. It's going to be traffic jams and music that isn't going to be coordinated. And that can really create messed up biochemistry 101. And that's going to create a demand and supply problem. You're not going to create energy at the level that you need to, and you're going to be exhausted and tired. And then you're going to create more excitatory neurotransmitters, which are going to be more difficult to fall asleep. And now you get this vicious cycle of a snowball rolling downhill that just keeps up picking speed more and more and more and more. And there are genes, there's clock genes that can make someone more susceptible to being dysregulated with their time or desynchronized with the time. Things like traveling from west to east is a lot harder than east to west because you're losing time. And there's just a lot of challenges with having your circadian rhythm, especially third shift workers, when they have to work at, or even second and a half, third shift workers. That's really hard on the body, and that will take its toll over time. You can go to the next screen here. Sorry, I'm pressing forward, but it's not moving. Okay. So anyone who stays awake for more than 3 hours or more between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. for more than 5 days a year is classified as a shift worker. How many people are classified as a shift worker? I mean, everyone. And again, I can't see the entire slide because my photo or my picture is taking up the screen. So I'm sorry I can't see that. And it only takes a few nights of poor sleep for things to start going really, really wrong. And according to Dr. Sachin Panda, if you haven't read his book, The Circadian Code, it's a really great book. The truth is we're all now effectively shift workers. And we got to be very vigilant with three major factors that I'm going to be talking about today that you can modulate when you want to make sure you're trying to entrain your circadian rhythm. And it has to do with movement, it has to do with food intake, and it has to do with light exposure. So first, we want to eat when our bodies metabolize food most efficiently. And that really comes to daytime timing, right? I mean, we're not engineered to eat in the dark. We're not engineered to eat at 10 o'clock because the pizza place is going to have delivery, or we just have a craving for a midnight snack and we have a refrigerator that keeps it cold, and we have a quick heating device. Hopefully it's not a microwave to warm it up, but we're just so desynchronized with the timing of our food. And if you could just get that down and make sure that you're eating when it's light out, and or there's lights that are out, not fake lights in your home, that's going to be a great start. And I tell clients, I really feel that there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do a 12-hour window. So if you have your last meal at 6, you shouldn't be eating before 6. If you have your last meal at 10, then you're going to have to wait till 10. And of course, there's other circumstances, but I do not buy into, I have low cortisol, and the doctor told me to eat small meals throughout the day. And that's how I combat this. That's like the 8-track tape philosophy. And I joke around, it's like the 8-track tape went out a long time ago. Now we have satellites, and that's like the calorie in, calorie out model. It just doesn't make sense anymore. And ultimately, we want to learn how to be metabolically healthy. That means we have to eliminate processed foods and sugary foods, and make sure we feed our good microbiome, and we support our liver, and we eat at times in the day when it's light out, and we have time restricted eating windows that are at least 12 hours in length. Second is we want to make sure we're moving throughout the day, and we're engineered to move. You go to any blue zone country where they have centurions there, and they move all day long. So if you're in a work environment, get a stand-up desk and stand up and sit down, have the opportunity to go for a walk, get your bodies exposed to light. When you first wake up in the morning, you want to pull those curtains open and get that light on you. And then as soon as it gets dark at nighttime, you want to really be vigilant about that. That's number 3, but we're talking about movement. So we want to get our movement. We want to have the sun at least on our body at some time throughout the day. And I know I grew up in Toronto in Canada, and I remember in the fall and winter times, it would be dark when you first wake up, and then you'd come home and it'd be dark. And they have seasonal affective disorder issues, and it's really hard to get sunlight, but they do have sun lamps that you could be using. And certainly you should be moving as much as you possibly can, within reason, to be able to tell your body that you're in the environment, you're in the earth, you're meant to move. And that will help entrain your circadian rhythm and tell your cells what sides, what's up, what's north, what's south, if that makes sense. And third, we want to get the right amount of sleep so that we can do it again tomorrow. And that really has to do with keeping consistent schedules, even if it's on a weekend. I know that's a hard thing to do for people, but see if you can, as much as you possibly can, be in bed by 10 and do that every night of the week. Obviously, you can't do that, but if you're in bed by 11 every night of the week, stick to a schedule. And as soon as it gets dark at nighttime, it's funny, I can't remember, I think it was Mike Mutzel, I follow him, and he talked about how he has chickens that he makes, he gets eggs with. And then it really occurred to him that when it was in the fall time and it was shorter days, he was wondering where the chickens were. And they were all in their coop because their body was like, hey, it's time to pack it in. It's time to go to bed. And animals are really more entrained than we are, and we can learn a lot from them. And when it's dark out, they're nowhere to be had. They're not playing on their phone or checking their email or getting notifications. We are. And I'll give you a really interesting just anecdote. When I would come home from work and I would check my email, and I'd still be doing tasks and reports. And I had my dinner maybe at 7, and now we're at 10, 11. And even with my blue blocker glasses on, and I would take my glucose levels and I'd be in the 120s and 30s. So there's another connection. What we're going to be talking about today is that not only does the exposure to blue light tell your brain, hey, it's daytime, hold off on the melatonin production, continue to make cortisol and really get you discombobulated with the earth, but we're also going to jack up your glucose levels so that you're going to jack up your insulin levels and become insulin resistant and become metabolically sick. And that's why we see so many people doing so poorly with the virus is because they're metabolically sick. Next slide. And I'm not sure why I'm pressing the, okay, so who am I? If by now you don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen, and I have coaching clients all over the world, which is really a great privilege to be able to talk to everyone in all different cultures and different time zones. It's interesting. I'll say I'm in the morning, I'll be in Europe, and at nighttime, I'll be in Australia. And so ultimately, we have a community of over 60,000 men and women between the Facebook groups that we do and the pages and the YouTube channel that we do. And we've coached 300 of the men personally and women using the strategies that we're going to be talking to you about tonight. And really what I've learned is that there's no one perfect, take this diet, take this supplement. It's integrated health. And that really means your circadian rhythm, your blood sugar balance, your brain training, your gratitude, your celebrations, your entrainment. We said that of your circadian rhythm, your movement levels, your focusing, your training your brain. There's so many things that go into a successful outcome. Also have a high-ranking podcast and speaker at conferences, and I consider myself a leader in the functional medicine world as it relates to the truth about adrenal fatigue and using DNA genomics to understand the connection between stress and what you've inherited. And now we see these perfect storms. So what I want you to do is, if you can, check out this Truth About Adrenal Fatigue roadmap, which I created a couple months ago. And you can find it at truthaboutadrenalfatigue.com, and then you'll see a place to click for the free book. And what we do is, in that one, we teach you why adrenal fatigue is not accepted as a legitimate diagnosis in the medical curriculum. And we also teach you about 4 truths about adrenal fatigue that your doctor hopes you never find out. We also teach you about why HPA axis dysfunction itself, in my opinion, is not a good term. And then lastly, 5 landmines that you need to avoid, that if you don't, your exhaustion will get worse. The bottom line is the take-home message of this book is that the number one stress in your body is oxidative stress. And when you have oxidative stress, that's going to stimulate your HPA axis. And it's a great starting book. So anyways, I started this conversation last week. If you missed our talk about the things that we were talking about in terms of saliva testing, I had a new focus in terms of the HPA axis and how mast cells and stress stimulate the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. The reason I'm showing you this is because I want you to remember, at the end of the day, cortisol is what gets released. And cortisol is a glucocorticoid that helps us generate immediate energy. So it basically gets your glycogen stores from your muscle and your liver into your bloodstream so that you could have immediate energy. It helps to divert blood flow to your working muscles away from your parasympathetic system. It helps to support your immune system. It helps to balance your electrolytes. It does a lot of things. And so how does that have to relate with our sleep? Well, what's going to happen is it's going to create major blood sugar imbalances. And what we really want to do, if you were to get nothing else from this presentation, is to keep your blood sugar as stable and as low as you can throughout the day. And that means avoiding refined sugars, making sure that you're not eating processed food, you're supporting your gut health, you're supporting your liver health, but you're also making sure that you're eating in an appropriate time of the day. And lastly, you want to make sure that you're controlling your oxidative stress, or identifying the embers that aren't being extinguished that are driving up your oxidative stress, because that's going to drive up your cortisol and that's going to drive up your insulin. So what we do is we work with our clients, we use the glucose and ketone monitor to teach them what is your baseline readings. So take your reading before your first meal, when you're breaking your fast, that's what a break fast is. And you see if your glucose ketone index, or the glucose that you have divided by the ketones you have, is less than 10. And that's a goal. It should be less than 10. So that means if you are somewhere in the 90 to 100, you're anywhere between 5 to 6 millimoles, then you want to make sure that your ketones are at least 0.5 to 0.6 so that you're less than 10. But the problem is that we are told small meals more frequently, which drives up your glucose, which drives up your insulin, which lowers your ketones. And now your glucose ketone index is way above 15, 20, 30. So it's really important. Now, how does that have to do with sleep? We talked about that earlier. If your glucose levels are high, your cortisol levels are high, or vice versa, it's a two-way road. Your cortisol levels go high, it raises your glucose levels go high, it raises your cortisol, because you're not getting glucose inside the cell, and your body senses that as a stressor, and it releases more cortisol to release more glucose, and you have this vicious cycle. And this causes the roller coaster ride of your ups and downs, and you get tired, shaky, and lightheaded if you don't have a meal, and you get really sleepy and tired when you do, and you feel like you're never satiated because you have leptin resistance, and you're just driving up your insulin, your triglycerides, your fatty liver. It's creating more and more problems. And ultimately, you're not going to fall asleep, you're not going to stay asleep, and you're not going to wake up feeling recharged. So blood sugar is a huge cause and effect. Of course, you could be having the best diet and eating no cupcakes and bonbons, and your glucose levels are going to be up and down because of your oxidative stress or your psychological stress. So those are huge challenges. So cortisol is a glucocorticoid. When it breaks down glucose or glycogen, it causes insulin to be released. When insulin is released, it causes insulin resistance. And ultimately that stimulates further your cortisol levels, your neurotransmitter levels, and it creates this vicious cycle. So at the end of the day, that results in inflammation. So let's talk about excitatory neurotransmitter balance, because this is a really amazing topic that I think we're just getting to understand a little bit further. So neurotransmitters are chemical signals that enable your nerve cells to communicate via synaptic transmission. Neurotransmitters affect the whole body. There's mentally, helps you focus, learning ability, physically, neuromuscular junction, sleep, cardiac function, metabolism, weight, emotionally, mood, behavior, social attitude. They're chemical messengers that help our body function, is basically what they are. And the three that I want to talk about as it relates to sleep are glutamate, histamine, and catecholamines. And tonight we're only going to be talking about glutamate. So as far as glutamate goes, glutamate's really, really important. It's the most abundant neurotransmitter in the brain, and it's really important for learning, for memory acquisition, for sleeplessness. So depression when it's low. Think about evolutionarily when we were stressed and we didn't have light bulbs and we had more wars or famines or foraging and survival of the fittest, if you will. And ultimately, it would behoove you to have higher glutamate levels, because you'd be more intelligent, you would be more motivated and driven, and you would be less needing sleep, and you'd be able to just recreate and reproduce. Those types of genes get passed on. But what's made things so horrible now, what used to be evolutionarily favorable as this ability to make more glutamate and clear glutamate out less, it's a double problem. I have these gene SNPs where the GAD enzyme is what converts glutamate into GABA. And many people have inhibition of that gene, meaning it doesn't convert glutamate into GABA. But then the DAO enzyme in the brain produces more glutamate. So you produce more and you reduce less. And that makes a person intelligent and motivated, but it also makes them highly, highly agitated and paranoid, and maybe even ruminating thoughts and panicky, if you will. But what's happened is we thought it would be a great idea to put glyphosates and pesticides and herbicides in our soils to kill the pests that were reducing the profits of crops, and modify these foods so that we could have a higher yield and more profits. But yet what's also been known is glyphosates is a copper chelator. And when you don't have enough bioavailable copper, you're not going to be able to make energy effectively. But the other major problem is that glyphosate really messes up our glutamate production or our glutamate reduction. So we don't have the ability of the bacteria to reduce glutamate effectively, and that creates excessive glutamate levels. On top of that, we have glutamate in all of the additives in our foods by companies that want something to taste better and more addictive. And so when we would normally get glutamate, it would be in protein and it would have a very slow rise because it's in food and it's intelligent and it needs to be broken down and slowly increased. But now we're getting it at such high influential levels without the ability to reduce it. Plus, we're all walking around inflamed, and the GAD enzyme that converts glutamate into GABA is inhibited through inflammation. And then you have a GAD SNP, and then you have school shootings and agitations and sensitivities and rudeness and social media and biasing. And it creates that perfect storm for not sleeping and not turning your mind off. And excitotoxicity is what really happens. And you're seeing a lot of neurodegenerative conditions as a result of that. I mean, I wish I were lying, but that's what it's about. So I show this diagram where you can see glutamate is circled and the GAD enzyme converts into GABA, and inflammation and infections inhibit that enzyme. Another thing that inhibits that enzyme is ATP. So, or supports that enzyme. So if you're not combining the food you eat with the air you breathe to make ATP and water, you're creating oxidative stress. Already that's going to slow down your GAD enzyme. And then on top of that, you're burning through all your magnesium. Your magnesium is going to slow down the GAD enzyme because you need magnesium as a cofactor. And then you're not going to be making ATP because you're not making ATP. That's going to slow down that enzyme. And you have someone that's going to take Xanax, and Xanax is not going to increase the conversion of the overflowing glutamate bucket. It's just going to increase the production of GABA, or not even production, whatever production there is dripping through the small hourglass of the isthmus being compressed. You have these little drips of GABA, and that Xanax or the benzodiazepines keep that glutamate GABA around longer, but it's not fixing the problems. And then people take GABA, and now you have people that are wired and tired, and it's major problem. So glutamate is the most abundant neurotransmitter in the brain. It's excitatory for your nervous system. It's that fight or flight feeling. It doesn't allow us, it keeps you from sleeping, keeps you anxious, unable to relax, highly agitated. And life is really about balance. And so genetically, I don't even really need to see that you have a GAD enzyme SNP, because I already know that you probably have magnesium deficiency. You definitely are not combining the food you eat with the air you breathe to make ATP. And as a result, you're inflamed. So you're going to have high glutamate. Then you also live in an environment where you're eating glyphosated foods, or you can't avoid it because it's ubiquitous. And then you don't have the ability to reduce the bacteria in your body to reduce the glutamate. And you're no wonder why you're not sleeping, right? Does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. As far as these elevated glutamate levels are associated with panic and adrenal function excess, also depression, impulsivity. And so basically it's a vicious cycle where this elevated glutamate creates excess adrenal function, which creates excess inflammation, which increases excess glutamate. And then you have this big vicious cycle. And ultimately, normally the glutamate is bound to a protein, like I was saying, but now that we get it exposed in foods that are highly glutamate based, we just are overflowing that bucket. And this is the list. Again, if you want this PowerPoint presentation, when I send you the replay of the video, then just reply, please send me the PowerPoint, and I'll do that. But if you look at these foods, you'll see these isolates and these hydrolyzed and these anything that's fortified, anything that's natural or artificial or citric acid or malt seasonings or cornstarch or all of these things are going to have high amounts of glutamate in it and going to create a lot of stimulation. So if you are very sensitive to MSG, then these are the things that, this is why you're inflamed, you're not combining the food you eat and the air you breathe, you're magnesium depleted. So you can say, well, if I ate more magnesium, would I do better? Yeah, 100%. I usually tell clients, work your way up to 5 to 10 milligrams per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 200, 10 times 200 is 2,000. Half of that is 1,000. That's how much magnesium you should be taking. And you should be testing your RBC magnesium and be right around 6.5. So what I suggest to people is no MSG or artificial foods, natural. It's amazing to me that the food bill and all the additives that we put on foods, A, are allowed to go in there when Europe doesn't allow that to happen. And B, we even sanction you to call it natural when it's artificial. How the heck? It's just laughable. Epsom salts, magnesium sulfates can be super, super calming and relaxing because it's lowering that glutamate. You want to reduce inflammation, that's going to increase your glutamate. And one of the products that we're in the process of developing is going to be really a great glutamate calmer. And I'm excited to announce my product line coming soon. But the magnolia bark or hinokiol, or some of the supplements, if you're interested in knowing what supplements those are, let me know and I can show you what they are. But magnolia bark, hinokiol, is a really good glutamate reducer. And so anyways, what we're going to talk about next week is we're going to be talking about the story of histamine, and then we're going to be talking about the catecholamines like dopamine and adrenaline. And I'll even throw in a little bit of information about estrogen, because estrogen gets cleared out that way as well. So now you'll start to see the connection between high estrogens or different times of a female cycle where they're not sleeping as well because their excitatory neurotransmitters are being impacted by the increase of estrogen that's putting more cars in the queue to have to go through the different toll lanes, if that makes sense. And then we also want to talk about the role of genetics and the susceptibilities that plays, and then we'll put it all together. I had previously released a course called Overcoming Overwhelm that I put on the shelf for a little bit, but I'm getting ready to relaunch that. So I'll also, by the next presentation, if we go into part 3, by the next presentation or part 3, we'll release that Overcoming Overwhelm course again. So that was what I wanted to talk about today, guys. As always in these presentations, we always offer help for you guys, not just doing these presentations and hoping that you get a lot of value from them, but also giving the opportunity to sit down with me and my team and discuss your health challenges and figure out what's going on. What have you tried? What's not working? What is missing? What are you doing that you shouldn't be doing? How's it impacting you? And is there a cost or thing you can't put a value on? What's happening that's not working at the level? And then on the flip side, what is it that you would be doing if you didn't have this problem? And what would your life look like? And what would be different? And what would that mean to you? And what is on your bucket list? I always like to hear that. And I don't like to hear, well, I don't know, I don't think about that because I don't have the ability to just even get out of bed. And while that might be true, part of the treatment is the solution, meaning you have to use that front part of the brain and start scanning out and planning what you're going to be doing when you are getting healthier and feeling that energy and creating that energy. It might be woo-woo, but it's a big part of what we do. And we do that on the call, and we talk about what you need to do to bridge that gap. Even if we don't feel we can help you, we'll steer you to who we think can help you. Sometimes there's these post-traumatic stressors that you need to go for counseling, or you need to just be able to move out of the or remove the toxic exposure that you're getting exposed to. And that's not just a chemical. A lot of the times that's a career or a loved one or an environmental home that you live in. But whatever your biggest challenges are, I've seen it, and we'll be able to help you overcome them. I do believe that the power of the body is amazing. On this session, we'll teach you how to craft a plan and how to recalibrate your body so that we look at tapping into those hidden energy reserves and being able to create an energy on demand year after year. And it's free. I mean, it's free. But the thing is that you have to be showing up ready to win. And you have to know that there's something missing that you haven't put your finger on, you haven't been told, you're not crazy, and you want to do whatever it takes to get your health back. And you must know that no one's going to care more than you are. That's what got me into the stress problem that I have in part, and is wanting you to get healthier than you want to get healthy. And I don't do that anymore. I'll work just as hard, but I'm not going to work harder than you. I'm not going to give you the life preserver and pull you in kicking and screaming and bringing me down because you're not taking accountability. So if that's not you, or that is you, call or don't call. And then lastly, this is the link that you do it. Kristen will share that with you in the link. We'll also post it in the Facebook groups or the YouTube that you will watch the recording of this. If you haven't subscribed to our socials, make sure you do. I'll send you those links as well, because we do lots of content there. And so you can schedule for that call. And then next week, we will be talking about part 2, adrenal fatigue and sleep, part 2, and start to connect the dots. And probably, to be quite honest, there'll be a part 3. And then it will be available for you to watch and have the PowerPoint presentations. And what I'd like to do is create a PDF of the take home. Okay, this is what you do about it. This is the things that slow down glutamate. These are the things that speed up glutamate conversion into GABA. And these are the food lists that you want to avoid. These are the things that you should be doing to regulate your circadian rhythm, so that you have those tools so that you can start to implement them. So I hope you guys found that valuable. I'd love to open the queue up for some questions now. Let me just see, because there have been some comments in here. Hi, everyone. Sorry, that's Kristen. How do I sign up for next week's webinar? Yeah, we haven't made the link yet, but we will. I haven't created it yet. And do you have experience working with chronic late stage Lyme disease? Yes. You know, again, it's the perfect storm where you have to fix the foundational things, and you want to make sure that your cells are respiring effectively. And I find that with a lot of sophisticated clients like that, they haven't done that. And they also haven't entrained their circadian rhythm. So whether you had late stage Lyme or not, you would still have to do those foundational things that we talked about, and ultimately assume that they're not happening, and really have a paradigm shift. Because I find that chronic Lyme clients, they go from one doctor to the next, to the next, to the next, and maybe while all of them give them a little different spin, they're still not getting upstream enough to cellular respiration 101. So yes, I do have experience with that. Looks like there's a few comments on the Facebook. Okay. And then, well, with the comments in the Facebook, make sure that we're not answering those questions on purpose, not because we don't like you, but because we want you to join the Q&As in Zoom, so that we will answer your Q&As. That's sort of the privilege, and the Q&As are free in Zoom. So it's just a matter of you signing up for Zoom and making sure that you get to ask questions. So Mitchell, is there a way to determine that you have too much glutamate, or know if you have a GAD dysfunction? I feel like this is deja vu, because I feel like I've told you this 3 or 4, 10 times. And you continue to ask me the same questions. And I'm saying that in a little bit of annoyance, to be quite honest with you, Mitchell, because I've given you a lot of ability to get those answers and work with me. And when it comes time to actually take the next step, you don't do it. And at some point, you have to take that next step. And I've told you that the genetic testing checks for GAD enzymes, it checks for DAO, it checks for other things that create inflammation, that increase your GAD or increase your glutamate and decrease your ability to make GABA. You can take neurotransmitter testing through urine testing. I don't do that too often, but what I do is I look at magnesium, I look at oxidative stress, we look at blood sugar, we look at fasting insulin, we look at all these things. And I've told you this before, and I always tell people, going to a seminar like this and getting the information is great, but not doing anything with the information, whether it's with me or someone else, and then 2 years go by and you're no further than when you were and you're behind. What do you need to do at some point to make that next step? Like, short of having, knock on wood, a heart attack or a stroke, what do we need to do to finally make that next step, to make that smelling salts go under our nose and think, holy crap, this is not getting better. At some point, I got to get my health back, instead of just asking questions and not using the information to get yourself back. And I'm sorry, but don't confuse my passion with being rude or being inconsiderate. I want someone, it's frustrating for me when I know that I could help someone and they've asked me the 3 or 4 or 5 same questions they asked me 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, and they could have not had 2 or 3 or 4 years of suffering and actually implement the strategy. So yeah, anyways, if there's other questions too, I'd like to answer those as well. And if not, I hope that you guys, okay, so 1 second here. So Toby, is magnolia bark tincture a pretty safe thing to try for anyone with adrenal fatigue who is already doing most of the things suggested in this class? So I'll tell you that if you were taking benzodiazepines and Xanax, I've found that it makes things worse. And I couldn't figure out why. But what happened was, when you finally get that GAD enzyme working better through dropping inflammation or building your magnesium levels or creating more ATP or being able to break down glutamate more effectively, and you make more GABA, those GABA receptors are so traumatized and injured from the Xanax or the benzodiazepines that it creates that same negative plasticity that taking the Xanax created. So it depends is the answer. But as far as, a lot of the times clients will tell me, well, I've done a lot of the things in your class that you mentioned, but the problem is that you're not doing it in the right order, the right sequence, or simultaneously. And you can be very close and put 6 of the 10 combinations of the tumbler lock in place, but if you don't put those other 4, the lock is just not going to open. And that's where we didn't talk about gut health and the role that gut health plays in neurotransmission. We didn't talk about liver and detoxification. One of the biggest things that I find is when we have overstimulation of our mast cells, you don't have enough NADPH to allow your other things to happen. And what that means is NADPH is like the Army reservist. And when it gets called to war because of mast cell activation, oxidation, Lyme disease, mold, EMFs, dopamine, sulfites, so many things, histamines, glutamates, when all those things are stimulating that enzyme to produce free radicals, it's using up your NADPH. And NADPH is necessary for recycling your neurotransmitters, your antioxidants, for methylation, so that if you didn't have MTHFR or did have MTHFR, it wouldn't matter because NADPH is a cofactor that allows those methyl groups to actually do something. So again, someone could say, well, I've done a lot of things you've said here. Like, what about magnolia bark? What about your NADPH? And what about your glucose ketone index? And what about those things too? So I would encourage you to think about all of those together to see if those are sometimes, but yeah, sometimes if you're 1 or 2 degrees off in the wrong direction, magnolia bark could make a huge difference. Epsom salts, magnesium salts can make a huge difference. So yeah, I don't think so much there'd be any, depending also too if a tincture is with alcohol, because that alcohol might create more histamine. So I know that there's some really good products out there that are 90% hinokial, and one capsule is 100, 200 milligrams. So it's 180 milligrams, which is a pretty high dose. I don't like to mention any names, but if you want to email me, I can tell you the name and give you a link to get that as well. So, but I think that's all I got for you guys today. And if there's any other questions, just email me. I'll send you the recording of this show. And I just look forward to giving you guys as much insight as I can. And again, excuse my passion, but when I see people that I know their name and have asked me the same question a year ago, and I gave them an opportunity to get healthy, and they said no, it's frustrating. So anyways, hope you guys have a wonderful night, and I will talk to you next week.